the government will start raising a part of its gross borrowing program in external markets in external currencies. This will also have beneficial impact on demand situation for the government securities in domestic market.
This was the first bouncer. Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman just hooked for a big six. Whack! In one stroke, she moved the foreign currency risk onto her fiscal accounts. She spread joy in domestic bond markets and heralded lower local interest rates. Frankly, I was thrilled that she was taking an entrepreneurial risk, especially since our foreign debt to GDP ratio is at an unnecessarily safe 3.8%. Of course, her ministry will now have to develop sophisticated treasury skills to hedge the dollar in international currency markets, but she showed a bit of swag. Next was a delectable square cut to the fence. Swoosh! For over a year, India's infant bankruptcy code was bedeviled by a few ambiguous and therefore crippling tax rules, and this was scaring away prospective buyers. Again, with one stroke, she fixed it. Acquirers under the bankruptcy provisions have been allowed to carry forward and set off earlier losses. Similarly, unabsorbed depreciation and losses can now be deducted. And tax will be waived if shares are received at a price below fair market value in these transactions. Finally, she dug a Yorker out of the block hole, sending it to mid-wicket for a critical single. That was a thump. You know, the despicable angel tax was abolished. As long as both the investor and investee file details in their tax returns, nobody would question why they valued a startup at 2x and not at x by 2. So far so good, but honestly, she should have tried to hit a boundary here. Why not abolish Section 56(2) of the Income Tax Act for every company? Why only for a bunch of startups which are certified to be high-tech, by a group of IAS officers? Clearly, by now, the aggressive batswoman was beginning to block on the front foot. She was now becoming incremental. India's shadow banking, that's also known as weak non-banking finance companies, NBFCs, they've been reeling under a cash crunch which is threatening to become a systemic crisis. She should have opened the throttle towards the Ben Bernanke authored TARP. You know what America did? Troubled Assets Reconstruction program. That saved America's financial sector in 2008. Instead, here, she offered a partial 6-month sovereign guarantee to commercial banks if a tenth of the assets that they acquired from shadow banks went bad. Frankly, the problem is a tad mightier than what such half measures will solve. So this wound could continue to fester and hurt. Next, of course, she sort of played all over another Yorker. Remember, Modi government 1.0 had displayed an astonishing anti-equity bias, and that's besides all the talk that the government had of igniting the animal spirits of entrepreneurs. Equity investments were taxed 4 times. One, at the point of sale, there was a capital gains tax, and this was followed by a securities transaction tax. Then, dividend payouts attracted a distribution tax, which was paid by companies, which is still to be paid by companies. And finally, dividend was taxable in the hands of the equity holder. So 4 taxes on the same equity investment. But wait, she added a 5th one. Until now, companies could buy back their shares without paying any levy, even as the individual seller paid the capital gains tax or used the loss as a tax shelter. Now, that's all over for now. Companies will pay a 20% plus 12% surcharge buyback tax. This will make the whole plan relatively unattractive, and thereby it will dampen equity values. Now, as if this wasn't enough, there is a move to increase the mandatory float of listed companies by 10 percentage points. While this could create an overhang of about 4 lakh crores of potential equity sales, and thereby again this will dampen equity prices, multinationals may just use this excuse to delist their Indian operations altogether. So who loses? You and me, and you know what we are? We are also known as ordinary shareholders. We will lose, of course.
Today we are nearing a $3 trillion level. So when we aspire to reach a $5 trillion level, many wonder if it's possible.
And ultimately, this false fixation with the $5 trillion economy. Assuming that the rupee depreciates by just 10% against the US dollar until 2024, now that sinks with an Indian GDP of 375 lakh crores, and that is equal to $5 trillion. Now, that in turn means that a nominal GDP increase of 13 to 14% per annum would be required. Now, if the inflation rate has to be pegged at, say, 4%, real GDP will have to grow at 9 to 10% every year to achieve this target. However, if inflation was to go up, let's say, to 6%, we can hit that target if real GDP was to grow much slower at, say, 7 to 8%. But of course, if the inflation rate is high, the rupee may depreciate by more than 10%, and therefore that is a bit of a minor calculation. So, we don't know how all these interconnected calculations are going to play out.